Sathyabama Institute of Science and Technology.
A very good day. This is Preetha Wilma Dawson, Assistant Professor, College of Physiotherapy, Sathyabama Institute of Science and Technology, deemed to be a university. In today's video, we will be learning about auditory pathway. In the previous video, we have learnt about external ear, middle ear and internal ear. Following that, in today's lecture, we will be learning about auditory pathway. Auditory pathway is a bilateral system which have several relay nucleus. These nucleus are getting interconnected extensively. We all know that the cranial nerve 8 is called as vestibulocochlear nerve. So this vestibulocochlear nerve is divided into two components. The first component is the vestibular component and the other one is the cochlear component. So this auditory pathway fibers will pass through the cochlear division of the vestibulocochlear nerve, which is the cranial nerve 8. The major part of the auditory pathway will be lying on the medulla oblongata, midbrain and the thalamic region. Now we'll discuss about the components of auditory pathway. So we have these many components which are following in a sequential manner. First comes the organ of corti and the next one is the bipolar cells, followed by cochlear nucleus and the superior olivary nucleus, lateral meniscus, then comes the inferior colliculus, then the medial geniculate body and the auditory cortex. First, we will discuss about organ of corti. So, we have discussed briefly about organ of corti in the previous video lecture on internal ear. We know that this organ of corti is the receptor organ which is responsible for audition. This organ of corti is present in the scala media, which is one of the compartment in the cochlea. This organ of corti contains hair cells. When the sound comes from the external environment, this will in turn go and vibrate the tympanic membrane. This tympanic membrane will send the vibrations to the auditory ossicles. At the end, that is the stapes bone, we have the foot plate. This stapes bone's foot plate is getting attached to the oval window, which is the part of the cochlea. So, the vibration of the stapes over the oval window will help in the displacement of the fluid inside it. This fluid will initiate the activation of the hair cells. As a result of activations, the impulse are sent to the higher centers. So, we have bipolar cells. The bipolar cell possesses one cell body and two processes. The first process is called as central process, which relates to the central nervous system, and the next one is called as peripheral process. This will be getting connected to the hair cells which is present in the organ of corti. The bundles of axons from the central processes will together form the cochlear branch of cranial nerve 8. Then this branch will be getting inside the canal into the skull. So this canal is called as internal acoustic meatus. So this internal acoustic meatus is a canal which is present in the temporal bone. In the previous video, we discussed that temporal bone is made up of 4 distinct osseous segments. So in that, the petrous part is where this internal acoustic meatus is present. Along with this cochlear branch, we have the cranial nerve 7, that is the facial nerve, which is also going along the cochlear branch along the internal acoustic meatus in order to reach the cochlear nucleus. So here you have a picture representation of a bipolar cell. You have one cell body and you have two processes. The one process is called as central process and the other one is known as peripheral process. Next, we will discuss about cochlear nucleus. This cochlear nucleus is present in the pontomedullary junction. So, this cochlear nucleus is of two types. The first one is called as the dorsal cochlear nuclei and the other one is called as ventral cochlear nuclei. This dorsal cochlear nuclei is situated posteriorly and it has two types of cells, that are principal cells and the ciliate cells. Whereas this ventral cochlear nucleus is present anteriorly, it is of two divisions, that is ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus, antero-ventral cochlear nucleus. This ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus is made up of octopus cells, whereas antero-ventral cochlear nucleus is made up of cellate and bushy cells. These fibers will be terminating in the superior olivary nucleus of both sides Some fibers will be going directly from the cochlea and it will enter the lateral lemniscus in order to terminate in the inferior colliculus. Here you have the picture representation about cochlear nucleus. As we discussed, cochlear nucleus composed of two distinct nuclei, that is the dorsal nucleus and the other one is ventral nucleus. So the ventral nucleus is of two types. The first one is called as ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus and the other one is called as antero-ventral cochlear nucleus. Next, we will start with superior olivary nucleus. This superior olivary nucleus is of two divisions. The first one is the medial superior olivary nucleus and the other one is the lateral superior olivary nucleus. The medial superior olivary nucleus is responsible to detect the latency difference in between the two ears, and the lateral superior olivary nucleus, it helps to detect the intensity difference. The fibers from this nuclei will join with the fibers which are coming directly from the cochlear nucleus to the lateral lemniscus. So here you have the picture representation of about superior olivary nucleus and you have it here. This green colored segment is called as superior olivary nucleus. Next we'll start with lateral lemniscus. So this lateral lemniscus is the bundle of nerve fibers. It is formed by trio types of fibers, that is three types of fibers. Some fibers will be coming from the cochlear nucleus whereas the other fibers will be coming from the superior olivary nucleus. Lateral lemniscus will terminate into inferior colliculus and some fibers will terminate in the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. So this is the picture representation of lateral lemniscus. This red color segment is called as lateral lemniscus. Next we will discuss about inferior colliculus. This inferior colliculus is the center for auditory reflexes and it contains neuron. These neurons are responsible for latency and intensity difference between the two ears. The fibers from the inferior colliculus will reach the medial geniculate body. So here you have a picture representation on inferior colliculus. This yellow colored segment is called as inferior colliculus. Next, we will discuss about medial geniculate body. This medial geniculate body is a subcortical center for audition. It is a part of thalamus and it is also responsible to maintain the latency and the intensity difference between the two ears. The fibers from the medial geniculate body are projected to the primary auditory cortex. When it comes to visual pathway, we had lateral geniculate body. When it comes to auditory pathway, it is medial geniculate body. In order to keep it in mind, let us consider. So, what is audition? Audition is to listen some music. So, M for medial geniculate body. So, what is vision? In order to see light. So, L for lateral geniculate body. So, you can memorize in that way. This is the picture representation about medial geniculate body. The red colored segment is called as medial geniculate body. And the last one is going to be the auditory cortex. The primary auditory cortex is represented by Brodmann's area, that is number 41. This receives information from both sides and it is responsible for the perception of sound. And also we have other areas. Area number 42 and 22 will help in the interpretation and analysis of various sounds. Whereas area number 20 and 21 are responsible for auditory short-term memory and facial recognition. Now, let's start with the auditory pathway. Let us consider this as the cortex and this as the brainstem. So, we have the cochlear nucleus. These two cochlear nucleus, which is yellow colored, is called as dorsal cochlear nucleus. And these two blue colored nucleus are called as ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus, which is one among the ventral nucleus. And the other two blue colored nucleus is called as antero-ventral cochlear nucleus. Then comes this structure. This structure is called as superior olivary nucleus. Then you have this structure. This is called as nucleus of lateral lemniscus. And you have this structure. This structure is called as inferior colliculus. And next we have thalamus. Along with the thalamus, there is the medial geniculate body. Now let's start to learn about the interconnections. So first, this dorsal cochlear nucleus will be going contralaterally and will go and reach the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. This fiber is called as dorsal acoustic striate. Next, from the ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus, it also will be going contralaterally in order to reach the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. This fiber is called as intermediate acoustic striae. Next, the fibers from the anteroventral cochlear nucleus will also go ipsilaterally and also contralaterally. These fibers are called as ventral acoustic striae. The dorsal nucleus will be going to the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. This fiber is called as dorsal acoustic striae. Next comes the VPCN. This will be going to the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. These fibers are called as intermediate acoustic striae. Then we have the other nucleus that is called as AVCN. This will be getting connected both ipsilaterally and contralaterally. These fibers are called as ventral acoustic striae. So, from the superior olivary nucleus, this ventral acoustic striae will be going to the nucleus of lateral lemniscus. After reaching the lateral lemniscus, these three, that is the dorsal acoustic striae and the intermediate acoustic striae and the ventral acoustic striae, will leave the nucleus of lateral lemniscus and reach the structure called inferior colliculus. So, when they are reaching the inferior colliculus from the nucleus of lateral lemniscus, together they are called as lateral lemniscus. And then this inferior colliculus is getting connected to the medial geniculate body in the thalamus. So that connection is called as brachium of inferior colliculus. And then the nucleus of lateral lemniscus will also have a connection from right to left side. So as we discussed in the introduction slide, this auditory pathway is a bilateral system. All these relay will be happening on the other side. Yes, the auditory system is a bilateral pathway. Now we have a quick recap of today's session. First, we had an introduction about what is auditory pathway. Auditory pathway is a bilateral system with several relay nucleus. That is, they have n number of interconnections extensively. Then we studied about the components of auditory pathway. In that, first we discussed about organ of corti. Organ of corti is a receptor organ which is responsible for the detection of sound waves. Bipolar cells. These bipolar cells has one cell body and two processes, the central and the peripheral processes. The central process is getting connected to the central nervous system and the peripheral process is getting attached to the hair cells of the organ of corti. Next, we studied about cochlear nucleus. So, cochlear nucleus is of two types, dorsal cochlear nucleus and ventral cochlear nucleus. Under ventral cochlear nucleus, you have ventro-posterior cochlear nucleus, anteroventral cochlear nucleus. Then we discussed about superior olivary nucleus. Superior olivary is of two divisions, medial and lateral division. Then we studied about lateral lemniscus. So the fibers coming from the cochlea and the superior colliculus, these three fibers together will form the structure called lateral lemniscus. So this will be going and reaching the structure called inferior colliculus. From inferior colliculus, the brachium of inferior colliculus will connect the inferior colliculus to the medial geniculate body, which is a part of the thalamus. So then we discussed about auditory cortex, about Brodmann's area and the area numbers which are responsible for detection and recognition of various sounds and also for facial recognition. And then we studied about auditory pathway in an elaborated manner. And yes, we have come to the end of today's session. And with this video, we have come to the end of human ear's physiology. That is the structure and function of human ear. Thank you.